in long term, we could lose our critical thinking because we don't question anymore where information is coming from. So that is incredibly powerful. I think our attention and ability to focus would almost become a competitive advantage in the era of AI. Because if you don't understand how to use it, you will become actively less intelligent. And if you know how to use it, it can be such an accelerator for your business ventures, for everything, reading, writing, creating, everything. But you need to be creative and you need to critically think still yourself.
Welcome to the High Vibration Reset. My guest this week is Tanja Guigon-Rech. She is the founder of The Brain at Work, a neuroscience-inspired initiative helping leaders and teams to better understand motivation, focus, and sustainable performance. So why do some people consistently perform at a high level while others, equally intelligent and motivated, struggle with focus, energy, and sometimes burnout? As you can imagine, this was a conversation I loved, all about the brain, what we can do to support the brain to do great work, and how we often sabotage its efforts. Before we begin, I have one small favor to ask. If you're enjoying the podcast, please hit the follow button. It just takes a second and supports the show more than you might realize. It helps us to continue to bring conversations like these to you every week. So let's hear from Tanja. Tanja, you are very, very welcome to the High Vibration Reset.
Thank you, Ciara. I'm lovely to be here.
So when we start, Tanja, can you tell us why and how you got interested in the whole area of neuroscience?
Yeah, of course. So I have to go back a little bit. So I've worked in different industry already in an array of sectors as an entrepreneur, but also on the employee side and also as a manager of a team. And then before I started my whole nutrition consultation business in Hong Kong with 4 nutritionists with me, one question that kept on coming up. So no matter if that was in Germany or in Hong Kong at the time, one question that always came up was, why is someone not motivated? And that question that somehow stuck with me. And then at some point I found more and more the answer in neuroscience, but I didn't want to accept the statement that some people are just less motivated or less performant. I mean, in rare exceptions, yes, but I didn't accept the fact that it's just a given. So I started to dig a bit more in that. And the more I lead into it, the more I realized there was a frustration behind it. And that frustration was often the question around, why can I not do it as much as others? Why does it require much more attention for me and much more energy to do the same thing than others? And then I realized 2 extremes. It was either overperformance or overstimulation. Overstimulation because then you can't concentrate as well as others, or overperformance because actually you do almost too much. And both very different behaviors, very different symptoms, but they both have the underlying condition that basically we're asking people to work out of their biological framework. So we're asking people to do things that we're not designed to do in a modern workplace. And that's how I came more and more into neuroscience.
Very, very interesting. So basically what you're saying is the workplace works against most of our biologies.
Yeah, it does. I mean, there's always an exception. There's always like the shining example of someone, playing at work and doing everything to have focus groups and whatever and like dedicated spaces. But most of us, the traditional sense of working 8 hours on the desk, it's basically against our biology. We're not made for this.
That's what most people have been trying to tell their employers for a long time.
Yeah. You know what? Interestingly enough, we have more and more studies that are actually older. I can't quote them now from the top of my head, but this is not necessarily something new. There are a lot of new facets that I'm, thankfully also incorporating in my research and work. But most of the things, the underlying basis for it, they're not new. This is not news that we shouldn't sit on a desk for 8 hours straight. This is not something that came up in the last 2 years.
Yeah, but it takes us a long time to catch up with what's not working.
Yeah.
All of the systems, the education system, the health system, all of the systems that we live in, none of them seem to work.
And when you think about it, let's say you wanted to run a sprint for 8 hours straight. Okay? If you could, you do that. You would never blame your muscles for being tired. Yet mentally, we do exactly that. We blame people for being not focused when they are forced to be focused for 8 hours straight. And no one is considering, there are also differences from person to person, but just simple biological effects like the brain cycles, like, distractions. I have such a pet peeve with open offices. We may talk about that later more. But some offices are designed for attention failure to begin with. And then comes the whole modern setup behind it as well. That doesn't make it better, unfortunately.
And there was this idea that collaboration is required, and to keep these kind of flat systems where, managers sat out with their team. But I say it all the time, but they're not realizing that this is impacting our productivity and performance so much. So tell us, Tanja, is there an ideal that suits most people, or is it very much dependent on your personality and how your brain is wired?
Well, the answer is yes and no. Sorry. Like a lot of things, even when I went back to my nutrition days or even economics days or, let's say corporate world, there's always a balance for everything. And there is never one clear thing that suits everyone, but there are truths that are applicable to almost everybody. Let me backtrack a bit. So for example, when we look at chronotypes, when we look at how are people able and when are people able to focus, some of that is biology. So some of one way of working does not suit another one, but only in the sense if we say, okay, at 2 p.m. today, everybody must focus. At 2 p.m. today, everybody must do the sprint, regardless when you woke up, what you had for lunch, regardless how your morning looked like, like we have to do this now. Of course, that is not fitting everybody, right? But then also, yes, there are chronotypes in terms of if you are more of a night owl or not. Having said that, that could also be a bad habit. So this is where nuance comes into play, because biology can be an explanation, but it is not an excuse. Sometimes bad habits disguise under the umbrella of biology. So we think I'm always been a night owl, but, we also have to start asking questions such as, do you check your phone before sleeping? What do you eat for dinner? All of these things. So we tend to see things in this silo, compartmentalized ways of seeing things, but it's not. Actually, we have to consider everything together. So now going back to the work question then. If we do consider, okay, there are biological setups that more or less work for everybody. For example, the hours after waking up are the most important hours because our brain is fresh, ideally. Again, personal condition and individual condition that you slept well, right? So we have to assume that there is a structure that is met by everybody, because if not, we will talk here for 3 hours thinking of all of the little things that can be different, okay? So let's say everyone slept well. The first hours of the day should never be spent on emails. It should be clearly communicated by the employer that this is strategic and decision time. This is where you just get down and you do things and you focus and you ignore things, unless really the office is burning next to you, you ignore things. So the perfect setup would be then morning strategy, decision time, but also work with cycles. So in the morning, especially, you respect cycles of between 30 to 60 minutes of full concentration time, no notifications, full concentration time. And then you allow breaks. Traditionally, breaks are considered worst case as laziness, best case as the absence of work. But breaks are actually not the absence of work. Again, balance if you do them right. I'm not saying, every 10 minutes, walk around for another 10 minutes and chat to colleagues, or worse, check your phone or play stupid games on your phone or watch short videos that make the brain even more screaming, like, what are you doing? So we have to also learn and teach how breaks are done. And from the employer side and the manager side, to accept that breaks are not necessarily evil, that we need breaks in order to perform.
Breaks.
So we do this interval almost like Pomodoro, but maybe not as strict as Pomodoro. Because when you come with these very strict concepts, it's really hard to keep track. When you decide, okay, 25-minute breaks, Having said that, I don't know if everybody knows the Pomodoro technique. Is where you put yourself an alarm, and after 25 minutes you take a 5-minute breaks, and that follows cycles, and the breaks become longer, and then the cycles become different. It is an amazing concept and it works, but it's very strict, and it could be too strict for some setups. So I'm saying 1 break per hour ideally, and really focus time without notifications. Then you have a longer break for lunch. Again, it depends what you do and what you eat. Ideally, you have sunlight in that time because it resets your clock, your biological clock. It gives you energy. Ideally, also, every break involves movement because movement, in fact, is the source of energy. Movement is not, you don't need necessarily, you need a minimum of energy to do movement, but movement gives you more energy in return than you actually dispense in that moment. So you do a lot of movement activated breaks. I have games with small tennis balls where you bounce them from one hand to another to activate both brains. Even finger exercises like this, because they're very much connected to the brain, can help you to just take a breather in your brain, reset, and to be fully focused. That was a very long answer for
No, but
of
a lot
saying
of
how do we set up the work. So ideally, we appreciate all of this. We appreciate cycles. We appreciate active breaks. But maybe we have to teach people as well how to do breaks and how all of that looks like. Ideally, I want to set up brain gyms everywhere because I think it's a skill that is more and more needed, especially in the modern world.
So we start off with doing our most focused work early on in the morning, no email, no distractions. How can we convince people of that? Because this is the worldwide bad habit. People go into work and they start checking all communications from the previous day. So is there a way to change that this is a requirement? Because as you know, and I'm sure you've got, pushback from organizations when you suggest these things that they have to check first thing in the morning.
Well, it depends. So you can, of course, I also appreciate some businesses, it's urgent to check some sort of mails in the morning. I appreciate that. So, the compromise, for example, could be the first 30 minutes, see literally what fires are burning in the inbox, take care of those and push the rest for later. And that can work, but it needs to come from management because it's really hard from an employer to sit there and then we have this expectation of always availability, of being always responding to emails. How many times when I worked on that side of the employee, someone came to me and said, "Did you see my email yet?" And it was literally sent 10 minutes ago. And I thought, you need to focus on one thing first as well. You can't just be always, because if you always come out of the concentration, it takes forever to go back into concentration. That's another thing employers need to recognize and appreciate is we have studies by now that show once you're out of one thing that you focused on, a task that you focus on, it can take, difficult to quote numbers here because they differ from the study, but let's say in between 10 to 25 minutes to refocus, which means in a very noisy, busy office, people spend their whole day reconcentrating. So they're actually not concentrating. They're just spending the time to refocus. So if you need that 30 minutes email in the morning, great. And then maybe have those difficult meetings, have those schedule that, but only from management down. I don't see this as a revolution from down up. I think it needs to be a revolution. There needs to be a structure from up to down.
Does this differ from men to women?
That's a good question. The cycles, not so much. Our brains are very different. There is a big biological difference. The way we think, the way we feel, everything. But more or less, the type of first hours of pressures are more or less the same. Obviously, when we talk about women, we have to appreciate it depends also on the cycle. Because women have this additional challenge of you work with your brain cycles, but sometimes there is the cycle as well coming in. So it depends also where you are on that phase, in that phase. But more or less, they work the same.
So take, for example, what we were talking about there. Do you think it's easier for men to follow that idea of not looking at their email than, women saying, I'm not going to look after everything else. I'm just going to focus here and get my own job done.
Oof. That is tough because I can't speak for everyone, but I do think in general, we could see a trend of women being always more concerned about everybody. So there could be the trend that women tend to check their emails more just in case someone needs them. And I'm not against email checking. I'm just saying if you had to decide, right? But let's say you plan everything else according to brain cycles and you do active breaks and whatnot. By all means, if the office functions very well and they all do emails in the morning, it still works if they work with the brain cycles. The active breaks are more important than emails in the morning or not. And when we talk about the difference between men and women, there's one thing I would love to talk about, which is multitasking. Because there is this it is old, right? This old perception that women are better multitaskers than men without sounding too stereotypical. This is kind of what you hear. Let me start by saying multitasking is an illusion. It does not exist. It's like reading 2 books at the same time and turning the page every 10 seconds. You tell me how much you can focus on both. It's possible, but it doesn't exist. Multitasking means switching from one task to the other just very fast. In not even milliseconds, just super fast. You can do it, but it is mentally exhausting. It creates a sensation of overwhelm. And the reason I think, I looked into that, there is research, but it's really hard to pinpoint one research like that. But there is evidence that women tend, exceptions confirm the rule, women tend to think more in a horizontal way, for example. While a lot of men, again, not all, but a lot of them tend to think more in a vertical way, which means the reason women are said to be better multitaskers is because they can see all of the tasks at the same time. Whereas men focus on one thing, which is why, really good project managers, often that's a role that men tend to, not always, but tend to draw to, because it's like this one thing. And then they ignore all of the rest, but they can focus on this one thing very well. And that's why women also tend to, or could feel overwhelmed with a role that requires only this one focus, because they also see the rest. They see, what's going on, and do we need to talk to this person? And it's this noise in the brain that is created just because there is a different setup of thinking between men and women most of the time.
You mentioned at the beginning chronotype. So how many chronotypes are there? And can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, I'm afraid I can't tell you how many chronotypes there are, because I think I would be quoting a wrong number.
Okay.
Because there's many different research about it. We can say that some people are better in the morning, have more energy, and some are better in the evening. What makes it really difficult is this whole habits. Environment shapes your reality, and perception becomes reality of the brain. How much of that is true for an individual? Nobody really knows. Then there is this whole neurodiverse topic. By now we have evidence growing that says that ADHD people, for example, tend to be night owls just because in the night there's less chatter. The nights are focused. So, how much of that is really biological setup then? How much of that is a chronotype versus maybe a neurodiverse person? It's really hard to say. But I think if we want to make it simple, we just say it's 2 types, like evening performant people and morning performant people, and then everyone in between, or maybe then 3 types. Yeah.
So there is research to show that there is such a thing as a night owl.
Yes, under the condition.
Yes, but
I can't speak for our science. So it is under the condition that not night owl per se, as in you shouldn't sleep at night. That is, according to me, an illusion. But there are people who are more performing towards the evening. But it does not mean, if we're talking health in general, I understand. And when I worked in the hotel, we had night managers. They were active in the night and slept during the day. But we do have evidence that it's not healthy in the long term. We do have evidence that the night is made for sleeping. But then it could indeed, those chronotypes, they could differ in a sense that maybe you go to bed at midnight, instead of 9 p.m. Like I'm going to bed at 9 and 10 p.m. because I'm waking up at 5. So I'm not a night owl. But my husband, sometimes when he's working and he needs to focus, again, how much of that is habit, he would tend to do that later than I do.
Yeah. So it's a lot as well about looking at, is this working for my life? Because I think a lot of people get caught up in this idea, I'm a night owl, I can only focus at night. And that's fine, as you say, it could be fine in a period of life where you live alone or you don't have kids, but then there comes a time when you're banging your head against a wall because it's not helping your performance overall.
Yeah, but that's where the good news comes in. Because the brain is so adaptable, you can change. And we have to be careful with the words that we use for ourselves. So when you always say, I'm just like this, biology is not an excuse. It can be an explanation, but of course, even someone who is more focused in the evening can get up early if they follow the right steps and just change their habits and their routines. They will never be 100% performant as maybe someone, differently at 5 a.m. But by 8 a.m., they should be fine, technically speaking, if they follow the right steps. So we can't excuse ourselves with the sense that it's just the way I am. Also, the words you use, they become identity. This is going off topic in terms of brain at work, but we have to be careful with the words that we use because for our brain perception is reality. And the more you tell yourself you're on one thing, the more your brain is looking for bias to confirm it. And that's not laziness. That's not even mean. It's just the way our brain works because our brain, evolutionary speaking, has learned that easy is good. Survival is based on easy. Survival is based on repetition. So the more you repeat something, the more it becomes your reality. And when we think of, especially when we talk about the modern work and setup and everything and modern problems or modern, everything that surrounds us, smartphones, constant notifications, computers and everything, we have to appreciate how old is actually the brain. So the brain is around 200,000 years old in its setup. A little bit has changed, not much. If you looked at the whole evolution on a 24-hour clock, smartphones will come in seconds before midnight. So we're working on an ancient software that hasn't updated yet. And we have to appreciate that, which is why, hence the idea of brain at work.
Very good. But you said off topic, which I don't believe it is at all in terms of the I am.
Yeah.
Because understanding that what we say to ourselves matters. It was always at hate of mine to hear people say, I'm a procrastinator. Stop labeling yourself.
Yeah.
Choose to be a procrastinator.
Yeah.
You choose to perpetuate that behavior when you say those words. So so that's really important to what you've just said there. The brain can change. We can change. We can change our behaviors. We can change our habits. We can change our personality if we choose to.
Yeah. But this is where I'm immediately thinking of two things. When I was saying it needs to be a revolution from the top down, because you need structures. And the brain loves structures. So when you put structures in place, also there's no excuse. You can just follow the structures, You don't have to think anymore. Oh, do I want to do this? You don't have to resist temptation. Then it's just like this. And if someone says, okay, after a certain hour, you don't put your notifications on. Even on your computer, you don't see when an email pops up. You have the authority to ignore it. If you want to do focus time, do it. So then it's a rule for everyone and it's great. And second point that you just mentioned was procrastination. Love the topic of procrastination because we also have to stop blaming ourselves for procrastination. Again, difference between do not use it as an excuse, but understand where it's coming from. And I don't know if you've read it, but I love the book from Oliver, was it Berg's 4,000 Weeks? I think I'm butchering his name. I think it was not Berg, it was Berkham. Oh God, sorry. But the book 4,000 Weeks. And he explains that procrastination is partly natural because our brain is meant to notice changes because it could be danger. So if now someone walks next to me, it is completely normal that I will not just look at you and continue with our lovely conversation. I'd be like, oh my God, what's going on? Because it could be dangerous. I mean, Luckily, I have a locked door and everything's good, but they could be dangerous. So it's normal if you work in an open office, for example, and chatter is happening around you. Maybe worst case, your phone is buzzing, you have a notification here, you maybe even cookies lying over there. It's normal you get distracted. So it's normal you have this procrastination part, but then don't label yourself as such. Don't say, oh, that's just the way I am. Appreciate also where these feelings and thoughts are coming from, because all of that in the end are feelings and emotions are never stable and they're never the same. So you cannot say it's always like this, which is just simply not true.
So you bring me to a point exactly where I wanted to go next.
Okay.
How much is impacted by our emotions? So we're talking here from the top down, the brain and how the brain functions, but how much do our emotions or how we feel in a day impact what's going on in the brain?
A lot. But again, sorry, this is difficult to answer for me right now because we are ruled by our emotions, obviously. And now we have to think, where do emotions come from? So our emotions come mostly from our hormones. But all of that, is again then influenced by our relationships, our work environment, our general mood, for women, the cycle as well. And then how do we translate all of this into actional behavior? And how do we react? So part of that is also us and our past experience, our ability to be resilient, our ability to resist temptation, our willpower, if you want, to not act on it or to act on it. So in the end, you're still in the driver's seat, but your emotions will still try to pull you one way or the other. But the good news is we're still in the driver's seat. And then also emotions can differ so much from person to person because of past experience, because of current moods and sleep and everything. Nutrition is influencing hormones. Sleep is influencing hormones. Your muscles are even influencing your hormones. So it's really hard to say one size fits all approach to emotions because they are so different from person to person. I don't know if that replied to your question because it's quite.
So it is a complex.
It is very complex. Yeah.
But do you think if we put in these structures that you say, the brain loves structure. So if we put in these rules and create the environment where the brain feels relaxed and can flow and think and, strategize a bit better, that has, then the emotions have less impact on how.
Yeah, of course. I would even go as far as say, even if the emotions don't have more impact, as you have less decision fatigue, as it's easier for you to work in certain structures, it's easier. For me, it's all about making good choices easier. Build yourself an environment and a structure that works for you and your life. And if you're talking about management for your employees, don't make them resist things because we can't rely on emotions because emotions are unstable. And they're never the same, which is why also I do talk a lot about motivation, but I don't love it because motivation in the end is a feeling and feelings are unstable and they differ from one day to another. But one thing you can control is structure. You can say, okay, I want to go running now 2 times per week in the morning. Put your shoes next to the door. Every evening we're preparing the breakfast table. It's easier in the morning. There is less resistance. There is less friction. So it's all about also diminishing the friction within your system to be able to perform, because then emotions will not matter as much anymore. So if you lower the resistance to do something good, you're halfway there. And then it doesn't matter if you wake up and you feel a bit tired or whatever, you see those shoes. I promise it to myself, I'm going to go for the short run, even just 10 minutes, I'm going to do it now. And then you're going to do it. But also when I'm careful with these kind of statements, it's because like I said, our past experience plays a major role. If we look at the brain specifically, there's this area in the brain that is getting more hype online right now in the last year or so, which is the anterior cingulate cortex, it's ACC. And that area is considered to be the record holder of again, not motivation, but of the reward. It's where rewards are recorded and the consequences of said rewards. Let me paint you a picture. If something feels really difficult for you to do and you do it anyways, It is recorded there. And now we have growing research that this area can actually grow, which means people who constantly do hard things have a bigger ACC. And that brings you to future, if we want to use that word, motivation. Because then your record center has stored the information. We did a hard thing, wasn't as bad. Actually, I felt good afterwards. We can do it again. So there's evidence. It's like a mini pop in your system that you can do hard things. And this hard thing, however, differs from person to person because it depends how many hard things they have faced in them. So for someone after COVID, where they may have been just stuck in their flat for 24 hours with no social interaction except for the screen, which is not replacing human interaction, they may have felt anxious to go to the bakery. So for them, the hard thing may have been just simply going to the bakery. For someone else, this may have been ludicrous to think it's not hard to go to the bakery, right? So it depends where you start. But the important thing is you need to start because comfort, too much comfort, don't get me wrong, I love my hot shower and everything. But too much comfort can create this false safety feeling. And then that could lead to increased anxiety, increased depression, and, in the workspace to less productivity, if you want, or less efficiency.
So how much or how many hard things do we need to do in order to grow our ACC? So just to make sure that I'm understanding that. So basically there's a part of the brain called the ACC, which is responsible for reward or for...
It's recording the rewards. And there are other areas in the brain that are responsible for reward.
Okay. And if we do hard things, then this area strengthens and grows, which helps us then possibly to be more motivated to do things that we don't want to do.
Yeah. I would say there is no exact rule, but I would say whenever you feel it's a bit of a hard thing to do it anyway. Unless it's putting yourself in danger and unless you're close to a burnout, then don't. You have to listen to your body. But if it's really just this feeling of, do I want to mow the lawn? It's so hot. Just do it. Drink some, just do it. Whenever there is this, when you feel it's actually not a big effort, you just don't want to do it, just do it. Just train your system to do it. There are no studies about this, but personal experience told me that, for example, when you travel a lot around the world, it's exactly why sometimes decisions feel easier for you or why hard things don't feel as hard anymore because you have faced so much uncertainty already. And your brain does not love uncertainty, but you trained your brain to say, listen, sometimes uncertainty is not as bad.
So talk to us about the resistance then. How do we move through resistance?
That'll be knowing where it comes from. So this kind of conversation helps because you are aware. It's, let's say, the same resistance than temptation, temptation you have, to eat food that is bad for you because you know it's bad for you. Because the problem with temptation nowadays and this kind of resistance is that everything around you in your life, in the modern world at least, is created to make your life more comfortable. And for you to be in the position to say, oh, you know what, I don't feel like it, I don't have to do it. Social media is for sure making us more egocentric as well. So there is this trend to only see your comfort. And the moment you only see your comfort, that is the moment where things go pear-shaped, right? Again, I'm not saying take a cold shower every morning and scream affirmations like a Viking, you don't have to do this. But you do have to sometimes ask yourself the question, is this right now hindering my own development? And that is tough. And that is really tough. So for me, the basis of this is education, is the sense that what I'm describing right now to you is communication about the fact that not all modern things right now are actually good for us. Not all convenience is making us stronger as people. Not everything that we see as food should be eaten. But that is tough because that is really, it's telling people to do something that they don't want to do.
So really it's about advanced decisions, isn't it? It's about deciding in advance what you want your life to look like, what is required in order for your life to be like that.
Yeah.
And then removing the individual decisions in the moment of, do I feel like this? Do I want this?
Yes.
Do I have
Yeah.
energy for this?
Yeah.
So having that preparation done can somehow remove some of that resistance as well, because we've
Yeah.
already made the decision.
Yeah, indeed. You're spot on. Exactly. So if you made a decision, this is how I want to feel like. This is how I want my life to look like. This becomes easier because then once you understand this is what I have to do, you do it, right? No questions asked, even if tiny question. The good news is that once you try it and you feel better, you will repeat it because you felt better. But the tricky part, the part when you talked about, where is this resilience coming from, is starting it. Because the starting often feels scarier than the doing. And one of my mantras is, with my first book, one of my mantras is action over perfection. That may be really weird as a German to say because, we do tend to be a bit perfectionists. But sometimes you just have to start. And again, it all comes down to informed decisions and to communication and to understand I just have to start. Unless you're happy with your life the way it is, but deep down inside, I think a lot of people are just scared of starting. And then they just have to start with something. And maybe they do a challenge for themselves. Maybe they say, I don't do this for 2 weeks. You have the rest of your life to do it. Try it for 2 weeks. If it feels good, great. Maybe you're going to stick a little bit to it. And also the appreciation that it's not always about extremes. You don't have to stick for something for life. It could be a little bit like that. It doesn't need to be all or nothing. And that makes decisions easier because they feel less permanent. You say, I just do it now, just for today. Tomorrow's tomorrow. Let's just start here. And then resilience becomes lower as well.
One of the things that's always helped me, there's two things that help me to deal with resistance. One is being very clear why I'm doing it, but having a real motivation, because health, it's a motivation for people. We need to exercise for health, but it's not compelling enough in the moment.
Yeah.
So we often see that people find it very easy to lose weight for weddings because there's a compelling why,
Yeah.
So it's having that real
urgency.
Yeah. At the moment, I'm very motivated to do my physio because I want to play tennis and I want to stay strong for tennis because that really excites me. So it's a strong motivation. But when I get that inner chatter, so when I get oh, you don't need to do it today. Oh, you're tired. Oh, you push yourself too hard. I have a line that I say, it's not an option. So not doing it is not an option.
Yeah.
So I'm counteracting that, that bull, which I call it in my book, Rise Before Your Bull, which is all about overcoming that voice. It's not an option. So just don't go there.
Yeah.
You've already made this decision, so it's happening. So girl, it's happening.
It's happening. And that goes back to willpower in the end, right? And but when we talk about willpower, again, it seems so futile. We have to appreciate that willpower comes with structure as well. So the more you tell yourself, and that's part of the structure that that you say, no, we're going to do it because it's part of, it's just the way it is. It's the status quo. We're not going to question it too much. And then you just do it. So a lot of that is down to habits, talking to yourself, increasing your willpower with that part, just following the thing that you said you do. And I love the thought of, let's say you have one motivation picture, like a marriage, like a wedding or whatever coming up, why not? Whatever works for someone, whatever is your motivation. I mean, there is a reason every year we're hearing something about summer bodies. Okay, whatever. And every January, everyone is full of positive plans for the year. I mean, if they help, they help. I'm not a big fan of that, but I'm not against them. I think whatever helps someone is great.
Exactly. But maybe if we're seeing it every year, it's not quite working. But anyway.
Maybe it's working for a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
But then, maybe if it's not working, you have to consider how important is it to you. And then do I have to build structures that work with it, not against it?
So structure was a word or a concept that I always resisted. So for years, I hated this idea of structure or conformity in any way. I wanted to do things my way, and I wanted to be in control. I wanted to feel independent and free. And it was, many, many years into my life where I was able to break down that false belief that structure was not something I wanted. So that was a resistance that I had, and I know many people have. But talk to us about the environment and how that can help to create structures that help us to flow a bit better in our lives rather than self-sabotage all the time.
Yeah. If we look at the environment as in the work environment, I mean, it depends which one we're talking about. If we talk about the work environment, we have to look at a couple of things. So we have to look at the overall setup. Is it indeed my pet peeve, the open office? Or is it smaller spaces? Is it individual offices? Then also we have to look at how many attention grabbers are around you. Could be a noisy colleague. Could be, earlier I mentioned the plate of cookie next to you, because that is also distraction. You could be your own personal phone next to you. Could be constant notifications of emails. It could be so many things, because nowadays, if we backtrack a little bit, when I talk about attention grabbers, we have to appreciate we live in an environment where businesses made it their business to have our attention. Our attention is value. So you have to also resist that. I know there sounds like a lot of resistance and a lot of bad news, but the bad news is we live in a world that was not designed for us. So we have to be aware of that. So we have to be aware that every small attention is eating brain energy, because attention is expensive for the brain. So you have to create an environment where you can focus if you want to, right? If you don't want to, no big deal. But if you want to, you have to create an environment where you can focus. In the office, that would be a quiet space, or if, employees are cool with that, like maybe even dedicated headphones where you just lock everything out. At home, maybe work in a place where you don't see the laundry that needs to be done, or like I'm right now seeing the dishes over there that need to be done. If possible, just try to blend that out. And again, appreciate that these thoughts are normal, because they're part of, as I said, the reasons why we procrastinate, but then appreciate it and move on with your life, because you don't have to focus on it, because you're not fighting against, I'm so bad, I'm feeling this, right? So create an environment that works for your attention, not against your attention. That will be the first thing. The second thing would be, appreciate your brain needs energy. And what kind of energy? And where does the energy come from? So to paint a picture, your brain eats around 20% of your energy. And it has approximately, depends a bit on the person, but approximately 2% of your total body weight. So that is a hungry, hungry, hungry being, the brain. And because it is so hungry, it loves stable energy. When I keep on going back to cookies, again, sometimes I eat sugar. I'm not completely 100% against one thing, but we have to appreciate a cookie will not help your brain. It will not help your concentration. In fact, it's working against it, right? And when one more person tells me, oh yeah, but our brain needs, sugar, glucose to eat. I'm like, no. That is a false concept. That is a misconception, because we can make glycogen out of any other source than sugar. So our bodies are actually able to eat a stick of butter if you want. I mean, don't go fall into this extreme, but you could, and your brain could use it as energy. So we're all good there. So those two things are very important. Your setup for your environment, your energy, because in the end, your brain is not just this thing sitting on your body, like, independently controlling it. Everything is connected. In fact, your muscles talk to your brain. We now know your bones talk to your brain, which is a bit new, but it's so cool. Your gut talks to your brain, your experience that day, everything talks to your brain. So make it easy for your brain to take the decisions you want them to take. Again, for the brain, perception is reality. So you need to be in an environment that supports that doesn't go against it. And then your brain loves to create an identity. So if, let's say, you put yourself in the basement to work, I have heard one or two examples like this, especially people who worse, sometimes burnout, that they went into the basement in a small dedicated space to work. That's even worse, because the perception you're giving to your brain in that moment is you are down there on purpose. You know what I mean? Like it's not a good perception. And you're creating your environment where your identity becomes a person who has one label, right? So you have to be careful of that. This is a very long answer again for a short question, but let's say if you want to create structure, you have to start with attention, environment, energy, and the idea that your environment shapes your identity. And you have to work with that, not against it. And then, like I said earlier, prepare the table the day earlier, prepare your work the day earlier and just lower the friction in your life.
So burnout, what's happening in the brain when we get to that point where we can't cope anymore?
First of all, let me say burnout does not happen overnight. We often have this feeling that it sneaks up on someone. It's not. It's a constant, let's call it ignoring of messages. That sounds mean. And it's not supposed to sound mean. It's meant to sound alarming, maybe, yeah? It's meant to sound educational, but it's not mean because the person who's suffering from burnout, which is a very real condition, it's not something in their head, they're not choosing to do it actively. Indirectly, yes, but they need education. So let me backtrack. Our body is amazing in communicating with us through our brain, but also just in general, right? So, but our body is also incredibly polite. So first our body would whisper, like something is like, no, we don't like this right now. Da, 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 da. And then it would get louder if you ignore it. So let's say the first small symptoms would be something easy, like, I feel a bit tired today. I don't know. I feel slightly dizzy. I can't see correctly, but then the next day that would be good again. So, like symptom ignored because today I feel fine again. Then the body would communicate a little bit louder. So let's say that's where the brain fog starts. The brain fog, sorry, my accent sometimes. So the brain fog would start, and you would start to realize you have decision fatigue and you are mentally a little bit slower than you used to be. But maybe you blame it on, I'm just tired, right? Because you are tired. So it's like, I can think less today. Well, that's the way it is. But because you suffer now from decision fatigue, you will become more and more overwhelmed. So you will become overwhelmed by simple decisions. This is not a work example, but it's a very good example I have from my own experience, which is right after giving birth, how everything felt overwhelming because your brain is overwhelmed. I suffered so much from decision fatigue. Still remember my mom asked me where she should put the thing that she just bought. I don't even remember what it was. And I lost it because I couldn't make a decision where the can of tomato or whatever it was, where it went, because I didn't know. I didn't know anymore and I couldn't make a decision anymore. So that is real decision fatigue. So that's a real thing. And that has physical reactions because you feel exhausted. And then the brain fog bit would become louder if you don't do anything. And eventually you'll go into burnout. And the last stage of that burnout would be the disappearance of joy, which is the saddest part really, where suddenly you can't look forward to something anymore. Suddenly you don't see the joy in small things anymore that before you did see. Everything may even become or sound more urgent because your brain is suddenly in survival mode. You can't relax, you can't enjoy. And whenever I say, now maybe you ask yourself the question, okay, but how do we stop these phases? Well, the good news is surprisingly easy, but you have to be aware of them. So the first part is awareness. The first part is recognizing that these are the first stages of burnout, okay? Without ignoring them, without thinking, I'm a resilient person, I just push through it. Again, biology is an explanation, not an excuse. Do hard things sometimes, but when they become too hard, also take active breaks. So these active breaks that I keep on referring to, they help to exactly not have a burnout, right? Or at least prolong it if you work under set conditions, because then if you do active breaks, you always give your brain more energy again. So they really help to prevent burnout in a way. But let's say you don't have these active breaks and you start to feel the symptoms. Well, then listen to them. Get exactly the opposite of what some people do in breaks, right? Don't check your phone during your break. go out in the nature, take a walk, take in some sun, have meaningful talks, a bit like the talk we have right now. Because connection creates also energy for the brain. Real human connection is energy for the brain. The sun is energy for us, right? And it's basing us. Sometimes also what helps is boredom. Let yourself be bored. And boredom almost sounds scary nowadays, because boredom is almost like, how many people do you know, very basic example, but how many people do you know who don't take their phone everywhere, including the bathroom, right? So we don't let ourselves be bored, and so our brain is constantly busy. And this is where it's becoming a bit tricky when you speak from an employer point of view, because you can't forbid your employees to take their phone in their private times anywhere. But they have to understand, if they play games or if they look short videos that increase their dopamine, they will come back to work even more mentally exhausted than before. So the solution is incredibly simple and yet so hard. Boredom, movement, silence, or meaningful connection. So simple.
Sounds nice. Tanja, how does AI, or how is AI starting to impact the brain? Is it helping us be more productive, or is it diminishing some of our cognitive abilities?
Yeah, both. The two of those. Let me explain. So AI can be an incredible, powerful source of productivity. Right? I use it every day. But you have to use it correctly. It cannot or should not, it can, I guess, but it should not replace your thinking. So you can get somewhere faster, but you need to be in the driver's seat. More so, I would advocate, this is not official, but I would say that, I would advocate you need to treat AI as a person. Because the more you treat it as a person, the more you keep a part of responsibility to yourself. There is a reason people speak online the way they do, and they wouldn't talk to someone directly, because there is this anonymity factor. If that creeps into your relationship with AI, you just, you become lazy. You do too many typos. I do 1 or 2 typos, that's fine. But, you do too many things and just leave it up to that person. You don't ever say thank you and please. You just kind of keep it rolling. And that in that moment, you outsource your thinking. And then, yes, you are actually becoming actively more stupid. This is really harsh language, and I'm sorry, but it's true. And we have by now increasing research that shows that. For example, the MIT study, I love the study. I don't know how much time you have, but probably don't. If someone is interested, look at the MIT study with the essays they did. It was incredible. So the gist of it is that they realized the study groups they used, who only based themselves on large language models and not on their brain power. Not only, of course, they didn't learn as much, but also they had no ownership feeling over what they produced. And with less ownership, they also had less understanding and everything that comes along with it. And then also the areas in their brain that the others used, they were less active, which means, yes, in long term, we could lose our brain cells. In long term, we could lose our critical thinking, because we don't question anymore where information is coming from. So that is incredibly powerful. And almost, when I talk about brain gyms, it's like, I think our attention and ability to focus would almost become a competitive advantage in the era of AI. Because if you don't understand how to use it, you will become actively less intelligent. And if you know how to use it, it can be such an accelerator for your business ventures, for everything, reading, writing, creating, everything. But you need to be creative, and you need to critically think still yourself.
Tanja, you've given us so much information there.
I know, I'm sorry.
Can you summarize, or, what is, in your opinion, most important to do for the brain to enhance our performance, to keep us motivated, and for overall happiness, I suppose, is the ultimate goal. But
okay,
what do you want to leave us with?
I would love everyone to understand that breaks, if done right, active breaks, are not laziness. Breaks are actually meant for the brain to develop creativity, to reset, to reboot, and everything. So that's the first thing. If I may say a second thing, then it's well, it's also connected with the break. Actually, don't use your phone as a break. The worst thing you can do in a busy day is use your phone as a break, unless you work on it every day. But don't use it as a break. Don't fall into the dopamine trap. If I may leave you with that concept without explaining it now at the end. But yeah, active breaks and appreciate where we're coming from. Don't fight against it, but listen to your body.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing all this knowledge with us, and wish you the best of luck with your future.
Thank you so much for having me, Ciara. And awesome opportunity talking to you. Thank you very much.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the High Vibration Reset. If you enjoyed it, please hit the follow button and share it with somebody who might need to hear it. Thank you for tuning in, and I will see you next week.